Hello. Today we are going to have a look at the Metropolitan digit, as well called the BUD, the Balanced Urban Development Unit. As we have seen in previous presentation of these lectures on the new metropolitan discipline, you have to approach metropolises within a methodology which is completely different from the urban planning methodology. Mainly, you have to approach metropolises with polycentrism. Large metropolis beyond 3-4 million inhabitants really need rail, not only because of capacity of mass public transport, but as well as speed. When you have to do long distances, you really need a transport that will be quicker than just buses. Then you have to have urban units, urban centralities, where those mass public transport provides the main accessibility, and many of the elements of metropolitan level services will be in those TODs, urban centralities. Then you have to have the municipalities, which compose the metropolis, must have a master plan, a plan of their own, those are the digits. And then the periphery of the metropolis have to be networked to provide homogeneous accessibility to all the points of the metropolis. We have seen previously that this is the main mechanisms of working a metropolis. We are not going to come back to it, but let me point that this old metropolis is related to the digits, the units, the municipal units, which are here represented by those circles, which are the central units. The whole metropolis, as I mentioned, the networking of the periphery, works with a double system. You have the public mass transport that provides accessibility mainly to the center to avoid cars going to the center of the metropolis, but you must have homogeneous accessibility to all the land, so the land the supply of land is not the one that controls the market, is the demand of land, because if the land is accessible all over, you can locate yourself in many alternative points, and you do not depend on the supply of land, and that is the best of the markets, the way the demand controls the market, and you have the provision of that land in an homogeneous way in all the periphery. That double system works providing access to any of the points through mass public transit, and mainly rail when you are in a large metropolis, and provide this network of roads that access all the points of the metropolis. Then we go into the digit. You see that this is one of the digits, one of the buds of the metropolis, and we are going to see how that works. You normally have an historical nucleus, and the road either went through the nucleus or goes by the nucleus. And when you have to provide the new public, mass public transport, especially if it's rail, you provide that accessibility in the other side of the urban system to be able to grow that system in the other side and not to infringe on the road, which has to have an upper degree function of metropolitan accessibility. So you put the rail station in the other side, and the new developments will take place as close as possible to that rail station, so people can walk or cycle or take the bicycle and they will not need the car to access all the points of the metropolis. And you are substituting car accessibility by public transport accessibility. So around those main stations, points of accessibility, you will have most of the social facilities, because when you have 100,000 people going through that station, you really can provide many of the social services and commercial services around the station. So you are creating there a centrality. The Europeans have that kind of approach since the 19th century, since 1850, when London started to build up the rail system of London. The Americans invented the word TOD, transit-oriented development, in 1993, but now mostly in professional circles, the name they give to those centralities rather than urban centralities is TODs, transit-oriented development. In those transit-oriented development, you put a lot of elements of social, commercial, economic, civic activities. The road network, when really it has to grow because it's heavy traffic, heavy loads, polluting traffic, high density, high capacity, and so on, you take them as far as possible from the central of urbans to avoid trucks going into the city, to avoid all the effects of noise and pollution. So you create an upper degree system for the metropolis, which is not the old historical roads that most of them go through the urban centers. That is a good location for industry in such a way that the trucks do not go into the cities. They only go through the highways. They upload, download from highways and go back to the highways. And you avoid heavy traffic on the centers. That is as well, that network, metropolitan network, is as well the location of other infrastructures like high voltage power wires, or gas or oil pipes and that kind of thing, and even electrical power stations. They are to avoid proximity to the urban areas. You build up that whole network as far. You don't want to build any road that is not necessary. You only really have seen in advance where those roads will go if necessary. If not, you don't have to build that. But when they become necessary, instead of having a kind of disjointed incrementalist approach, thinking, well, when I'm going to build the next road, you already know from the beginning in the structure of the metropolis that we have seen before where those roads have to go. You can develop the economic system of the industrial areas, and it's very important where you locate commerce. You have two alternatives. Either that commerce is inside the metropolis, around the TOD, around the urban centralities, because that way these people that are using the mass public transport can access that commerce and do their buying when they go to work or when they use the public transport facilities, or it is in the crossing of the big highways, mainly commercial centers, in the crossing of the big highways with the roads that access those municipalities. And then you have either regional facilities like a huge hospital, like a huge stadium, like a university, that can get into the crossing of the highways and the rail in such a way that you can either access it by rail or access it by road. And the function of those large social facilities is not urban, is not just one municipality, is all the municipalities or the area in the metropolis. And then as well, if heavy industry requires rail, you can have that location as well in the crossing of that. You can then further develop housing. You can grow that housing as close as possible to the public transport facility, and you get the whole metropolitan digit, taking into account that the base for all of it is the environmental quality. You have to protect that environmental base for the metropolis, and that environment has to go through all the interstices of the urban setting, and they have to be in connection. It's a continuous system like the road system. We have seen that in the previous things. You have this kind of setting, which is not a blueprint layout. It's a set of principles that you have to apply when building the municipal approach within the metropolitan structure. The footprint is limited. You see it's only 1.5 kilometers by 1.5 out of 4.5 kilometers square. So really it's only 1/9 of the land which is used for the urban development, and the rest of the land, 8/9 is used and protected for the environment. This is not a blueprint, as I say. This is applications of 4 municipalities. This is another 4 municipalities. You see they are all different, so you adapt to the circumstances of each municipality. Another 8. We have many examples, and I am not going to extend on that. And the whole urban digits, metropolitan digits, create the pattern of the metropolis. This is the example of Madrid that we will see in next presentation. That pattern is not unique. That was the pattern when you have a village which is not connected, has not merged to the next village. So when you have an urban pattern, a continuous urban pattern, like in many Latin American cities and in other cities around the world, you have to build up the same principles in another manner. When you have an homogeneous urban continuum, then you select some of the streets of the roads to be more pedestrian, more civic bound, like in the center here, and those which will be more traffic bound, which are in the periphery, and you build up neighborhoods with public spaces, with social facilities, and all related to the big metropolitan mass public transit system. When that continuous is growing in a metastatic way, as it is doing so in many metropolises around the world, you have to stop that. This growing of the system, urban system, without a larger metropolitan structure is wrong. It produces congestion, it produces lack of quality of life, so you have to stop it. You have to make a green space that, even if it's not necessary in terms of protecting the actual environment, it is good by creating it as new to contain the urban setting and then to change the pattern of that growth. Cultures are different. This is an example of that kind of approach of the Metropolitan Digit for India. The Indian set of public spaces is peculiar, is different. When you go down in scale, every culture has its own interpretation of the urban and social and economic relations, so you have to adapt that. When you go to the urban scale, the culture becomes much more important, and this is an example of an Indian setting. You have, as we saw, is not a blueprint, it's really a set of system of values of how you build up that metropolitan digit. The amount of land that you're using for urban development is limited, so the footprint is acceptable, and you can build up a metropolis that will work within that public transit system very strongly. You have the different scales of the metropolis, as you see, the metropolitan scale, the urban scale, and then the urban design scale. And that urban design, which are the TODs, you really must put 7 elements to make it a success. You must have intermodality, many public transport change of modes, so people can use the system of transport to access every point of the metropolis. You must have commercial public spaces, green spaces where people meet. You must have commercials and offices to provide jobs in that area that will have access through the public transport. You have residential high density, so it's a win-win. These people will use public transport, and that public transport will benefit from having people around the station that will use the public transport and creating the demand of the public transport. You have institutional buildings, you have social facilities, you have iconic reference elements that tell you that you are living there and not anywhere else, that's your place. If you have those 7 elements, it's going to be a success, those TODs. If you only have 2, it's going to be a failure. So the role of the planner is to accumulate as many TODs as possible. And those TODs obviously can have many different designs, and we are not going to get into that because now we are already in the scale 1/500, which is beyond metropolitan planning. Metropolitan planning, as we saw in previous presentation, is 150,000. Urban planning is 1/5000, and urban design is 1/500. So it's really far from it. Thank you very much. Next time we are going to see at metropolitan acupuncture, and you will be able to find these slides, if you want to use them, in the links that are in this page. Thank you very much.